Welcome to the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Together we explore the vast landscapes of life, delving into the rich soil of experiences, sowing the seeds of curiosity, and harvesting the profound wisdom that each episode unfolds. Welcome again to another podcast of Harvesting Wisdom. I'm your host, Mike McMahon. Today my guests are Sam Wang, David Dierig. Both are soil guys, seed guys, scientists, and work here in Arizona. Sam is University Extension faculty, University of Arizona, University of California Ag, Natural Resources. You've got a focus on enhancing cultivation practices, yield potentials of agronomic and vegetable crops, the impact, direct contribution to farming communities and the broader agricultural sector through research and education. Principal agronomist at Bridgestone Americas. Crop focus is Guayule, which we see here. And the cultivation, the processes to enhance the supply chain of natural fiber. Guayule's a drought-tolerant and sustainable raw material source. Research and impacts, Guayule cultivation for natural rubber, genetic improvement and agronomic practices to increase yield, rubber content, disease resistance. The significance is it provides a sustainable and economically viable alternative to traditional rubber resources. Extension and outreach is bridging the gap between academic research findings and practical agricultural practices. Contributions, modernization of farming practices, introduction of sustainable crop rotations in the arid and semi-arid regions. That's a lot, but it's only a fraction, really. I'll have you go into more depth. David, that was Sam. David now, position manager and plant breeder, geneticist at Bridgestone's Agro Operations, Guayule Research Farm in Eloy, since 2014. Your goal with Bridgestone is to develop that new domestic and sustainable source for rubber products to cater to the industry. The previous roles, you were research leader and location coordinator at the USDA ARS, National Center for Genetic Resource Preservation in Fort Collins. Early research work, you worked as a geneticist at USDA, ARS, Arid Land Agricultural Research Center, Plant Pathology, and Genetics Unit. Research focus is on specializing in bringing new industrial crops, such as Guayule, to the commercialization through breeding, genetics, germplasm, collection and evaluation, agronomic. And you earned a PhD in genetics from the University of Arizona. So, okay, you guys are both, bright guys, scientists. Your passion is what we're looking at here. Bridgestone is investing a lot and has been doing it for quite a while. Why? I'll start over here, Sam. Why Guayule? Why here in the Southwest? What's the idea of doing it here?
Yeah, Guayule is a natural rubber producing crop, and it's, right now in the whole world, there's only one plant that's producing natural rubber. That's Hevea, the rubber tree. And the natural rubber is a very important source for many high quality tires, such as the airplane tires, like the truck tires, and racing tires, tractor tires. And because synthetic rubber don't have as high quality as natural rubber. So, and natural rubber right now is most natural rubber is produced in Southeast Asia, about 93%. And so it's single source, and it's also very concentrated geographically.
Wow.
So right now, in the whole world, there are two other crop that's being developed for natural rubber. One is Guayule, and another one is Russia deadline. And we think Guayule is a lot more advanced towards the commercialization. And so it's very important, like strategically, for the country or for the industry.
Sure. So like every industrial country on the planet uses rubber for something, right? So if you really think about it, I mean, we look back at conflicts and wars and stuff fought over a single commodity. This certainly is a single commodity, and everybody needs rubber for tires everywhere. So there's got to be quite a demand push. So you got political potential issues, but you also have issues with the environment, right? You could have a hurricane, earthquake, whatever, something, or just a disease in that particular plant or something that wipes the plant out. Then what?
Yeah, talking about the disease, natural rubber, the Hevea tree, originated from South America.
Oh, no kidding.
And in early 1900s, there was a leaf disease wipe out all the plantation there. Almost all. Now it's only a few percent produced there. Wow. And somebody moved the plant to Southeast Asia to grow natural rubber there. So it's not native to Southeast Asia.
Wow.
And so in the future, there could be another disease. Who knows? That can wipe out the
I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit, and I'm gonna talk about the percentage of rubber in this plant, because this plant is really native to Arizona and northern Mexico, so it's more southern Arizona a little bit, but grows fine right here in Phoenix, right? But what percentage of rubber currently is from this, and what percentage comes from a natural rubber tree?
Well, there are really two different kinds of plants, because this is a shrub. In order to get the rubber out, we have to destructively harvest it. So extract the rubber out of the plant that we grind up. Where the rubber tree, the latex comes out just like maple syrup. Yeah, so they tap it, put a little cup under it, and that brings up another point, because it's so labor intensive. You have this forest full of trees, these rubber trees. Somebody has to visit it manually every day, put a little cup where they score the tree, and then come back and collect it. So it's very labor intensive. So my point is that it's a little hard to compare like the rubber content of the plant, which somewhere between 3 to 6% right now. That's one of the things that we're working to improve, compared to the tree that has this continuous flow, but also adds that labor component to it.
So when a rubber tree, I guess, I don't know if I've seen a rubber tree, because
Probably
I've been
not.
to Southeast Asia. I've been to Asia, but not
To a
Southeast Asia to see a forest of these trees.
Yeah.
How long does a tree actually live, and how big does it get?
So it takes about 7 years for it to start producing rubber, so get to maturity, and then it'll live maybe another 20 years.
It'll live that long, or
Yeah.
produce that
Produce that
latex for that long.
Yeah. The older it gets, the more the yield drops off.
But that's not a long time for a tree, a full maturity of only about 30 years, huh?
Yeah.
So they're constantly replanting the forest.
Yeah.
And it's a 7-year wait before it's got
Yeah.
a viability to
Yeah.
it. Then it's got a 20-year
Lifespan.
lifespan. But you kind of, so I guess we can't compare the percentages, but you could say we get this much rubber in 20 years of a rubber tree. What would 20 years of these plants produce? So you have a little bit of a basis there, right? Now, because this is native, it's blends very well with the environment. There shouldn't be a lot of issues. It's been here for I don't know how many thousands of years, maybe. But the rubber tree over there, you're constantly having to reforest that area, and I don't know, how does that affect even the soils? Is got a lot of uptake in the nutrients? Do they constantly looking for new areas to plant, or can you replant in the same area right away, or how's that work?
Yeah, that has its issues too, because when you have a whole forest of one particular species, you're limiting the biodiversity of the forest. So that's one impact. The other is, they do have to be replanted, and so if you do have one mono species, so not only does it limit the biodiversity, but also like the effect on all the the environmental factors that a more diverse forest has, and more open to disease issues.
Did the disease that in the 20s that happened in South America, was that some kind of a fungal disease or
Yeah.
some viral disease?
Yeah.
Was there ever, when you went through as a geneticist or group geneticist look at it, did anyone figure out how to prevent that like 100 years later, or is that still like the Dutch elm disease? It just wiped it out and
Yeah,
nobody figured it out.
they grow limited amounts in Brazil where it's native, but they couldn't do large production anymore because they know that would be just a sink for whatever disease that had it before, and maybe new emerging ones. And that's what's happening in this other region of the world. There are these other diseases that are coming up that we're seeing that are limiting places that we can grow it in. Plus, it's competing with other low-cost oil seeds like palm oil.
Yeah, palms are a big thing there.
Yeah,
Now, we got two tires here. I always thought all the tires now were synthetic, right? So they're not complete. Some tires are synthetic, right? Which ones are synthetic and which ones really need that rubber? Is the rubber what makes it a softer ride and a quieter ride? Is that what the rubber does, or it gives you more traction? What's the advantage of the rubber versus the synthetic?
you want to go or go ahead?
So majority of passenger tires now, the rubber in the passenger tires are synthetic rubber. And with other tires like racing tires and truck tires and airplane tires, track tires are all has natural rubber in there. Rubber is probably like 30% of like the whole tires. There are some other material in there, but with the quality requirement, we have to use the natural rubber for those high-end tires.
And is that mixed into the overall concentrate before it's formed, or is it layered? So is there synthetic, then rubber, then synthetic? How does that work?
It really depends on the type of tire. Like that tire next to you, that's, like Sam said, about 30%, a truck tire. And then as you get into these like 16, 18-wheelers, those are 100% natural rubber.
Oh, no kidding.
Synthetic rubber
No wonder it
just
costs
can't
so much.
match the resilience of natural rubber. So
but-
they would, like an airplane tire. If an airplane tire landed on synthetic rubber tires, it would blow up. So you can't replace you can't replace natural rubber with synthetic rubber.
But if I look at the profile of a tire, is this part synthetic and that part
Well, the
rubber,
bead-
or is it literally blended as a
Yeah,
Is
it's
it
certain
complete tire?
parts of the tire. Like the bead of the tire is natural rubber. That's where you need more strength. And then probably the tread is like was compounded with both natural and synthetic rubber.
wow? So it's quite a bit of design that goes into
Yeah.
a tire, and I know
Oh,
there's
yeah.
steel belts in some
Hey.
tires, and there's it's quite a sophisticated thing.
Oh, yeah.
And then this tire has no treads on it whatsoever. This is that used for drag racing, or is that what's the?
Yeah, well, this is a racing tire, no tread because we want it to go as fast as you can. So all the cars in the Indy series had this tire on it when the race debuted last year, 2022 it was, in Nashville. And then the whole Indy series that went across the country all had Guayule tires on them.
Oh, I mean, this is Guayule. This
Yeah.
isn't like from the rubber tree.
No,
This is the real stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, both
So-
of them. Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you say, so how many tires are actually in production with the Guayule plant? I thought that was still a plant. I know it's been researched for the last 100 years, but
Yeah.
there's still a fair amount of production then that goes into these. How much is that?
Yeah, so these are really kind of prototypes, or we've tested these tires. We've tested this course before it went into the race, but the idea was to be able to introduce Guayule rubber to a large audience. The whole racing fans that watch these races. They hear about this new kind of rubber, a more sustainable kind of rubber, and it's the first time they heard of it.
So how does it hold up so far in testing with natural rubber from a rubber tree?
Great. I mean, really, you could consider it as like a drop-in replacement, but there's certain advantages to Guayule rubber that we're looking at compared to Hevea rubber. Some of those are sustainability kinds of issues, and some of them are, performance issues.
So there is some performance
Yeah.
improvement. It's probably comparing apples and oranges a little, but
Yeah.
what would be some of the performance enhancements from a Guayule rubber?
Again, you're asking like plant people and stuff.
I was just curious if it's longevity. Does the plant break down somehow, or is it just
No,
literally?
it's more things
texture?
like rolling resistance, things like that. That one will do better than the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the plant stuff.
Yeah.
As geneticists, which is basically you both have degrees in that, right? And so that would be you're working with plants, plant species, seeds, germplasm, not so much the soil, but more the seeds themselves. And so I don't know if the technologies that you're using right now, this is just the pure seed that you're doing, right? You haven't genetically modified it per se. Have you bred this for better traits, or have you used HI or any CRISPR, or what technologies? This looks like you're just growing the plant that's natural, right? Or
Yeah.
has there been improvements to it so far?
Yeah, Guayule's been around Arizona since early 1900s, and seed like back then was brought to Tucson in 1916, and fields were planted then, and then kind of ended during the Depression time, and then World War II, all our rubber supply was cut off, like we were talking about. So the U.S. really got invested in the emergency rubber project. They brought like the top scientists from all around the country to work on this project, and it was centered here in Arizona and also in California. But they were doing a lot of research. They learned a lot of the basics about the reproduction of Guayule during that time. And so there was a lot that was learned during that time. And then the project ended in the 1950s. They thought, well, synthetic rubber's coming on. We'll be able to replace natural rubber with synthetic. We don't really need this. And so they kind of scrapped it. And then it didn't start up again until the oil embargo in the 1970s. And then, so really, like, there's been a lot of background research, but not so much what we can do today with modern breathing, using all the tools like the molecular tools. We've sequenced genomes of Guayule. We know a lot about where genes are located on chromosomes, how many chromosomes, how many, aneuploids, how the reproduction works. And so we've been, for the past 10 years, we've really had a, pretty intense breeding program where we're using all these tools to improve it. We're not doing genetic modification like CRISPR right now. We think we're making more progress using the tools that we have, like the markers, genomic selection, and things like that to improve the rubber content and a few other traits. But that's really what we're driving at, is to have a higher rubber yield per plant.
Okay, so that would be, I don't know if you'd be turning on some genes or stopping some processes to
Yeah.
elongate the rubber, because I don't know where the rubber actually.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing to
This is how do you
talk
get the
about
rubber
right
out?
now, is that the rubber, it's not in the leaves or in the flowers that you see. It's all in the stem portion of
Okay.
the plant.
In the
So-
roots as well, or just the
Yeah,
stems?
the roots too. So all the stem tissue, the bark, specifically on the stem, is where all the rubber accumulates.
Ah, okay. So it's interesting. I'm reading a book from 1848, and it's about manures, and it's before the Industrial Revolution, but it was, I guess, a bestseller in the time. I don't know how many people read about manures, but I think everybody was in agriculture back then, so it was considered a really important book. But I was reading it, and it was talking about barks. And he literally listed like every tree that I could think of. And he talked about there's basically 3 layers of barks, and it's that middle layer that had the sap and he was talking about all of the different nutrient values that came from those barks, and if they were talking about basically creating biochar with ashes. And so it's interesting because like a lot of the research, even this research started in early 1900s. National emergency, they thought they needed it up to the 50s, and they thought artificial methods would fulfill the needs, but now they're back. What goes around comes around, right? And it's interesting because it seems like you almost have to look back at research that was done 200 years ago, prior to some of the Industrial Revolution, and now but you also have the advantages of all these new tools, all these new, genetics and that kind of thing. So,
Right.
you've worked on other plants before. What other plants, and how do you lead? What leads a scientists or industry or universities to kind of focus on a plant? Because I know I was walking through U of A yesterday, and I was talking with seed guys yesterday, and we were talking, and I saw doors that said cotton on them, and so back in the day, cotton was a big thing, right? 13 million acres. Now I think it's down to 10 or 11 million, and it's shrinking as we go. But you have to. There's things that lead you to a particular plant, and you could live an entire career on a plant. So what plants that have you've worked on, and why is this one kind of like more of a fun thing or more of a challenge for you?
Okay. I know Davey has worked on Guayule for a long time, so I'll start. I was a university faculty for U of A and University of California for about 6-7 years.
Mm-hmm.
During that period, I worked on cotton, wheat, and vegetable crops and many other new crops. We work on Lesgrella, Stachys, a lot of them work with Dave together, and some other crops. And I talked to other university faculties that, in Arizona, we can grow a lot of new crops.
Mm-hmm.
And we tried a lot of new crops in university. And all the research come in and then go after, your grant finish, it's gone. And a lot of reason there because there are no industrial backup. So one thing attracted us to work on this on Guayule is because Bridgestone is behind it, and it's a big company, and so now we have a long-term plan. We can keep working on this crop and to commercialize it. This, like all other new crop we work on before, it's not comparable.
Okay, there's no money.
Yeah,
Or there's no industry push.
Market.
there's no industrial push, and then there's no long-term plan.
Right.
Because all the university grant is just like 5 years and it's gone. Right?
Yeah. My company with the soil company, we're into industrial hemp. That's one of the things because there's so many uses, and we see that as, again, it's an old crop, right? It comes from China thousands of years ago, and everybody's had hemp around the world, and back in the early 1930s or whatever, they outlawed the plant, and they, for some reason, tied it in and thought it was similar to marijuana, that you had THC and that kind of thing. But all of a sudden, a lot of it went away, and I think Nancy Reagan on her war on drugs destroyed all the germplasm that existed for it, which is kind of an ignorant thing to do in a lot of ways. But literally, it's a crop that now it's starting from scratch, but it's thousands of years old. But it's the same concept. It's low water using. It's great remedial crop for the soils, and it's got so many different uses. What do you guys kind of see these different crops? So hemp would be one, Guayule would be another. What else do you see out there that's promising or really interesting for either feeding people or industrial uses?
One story that kind of made me feel good was that Sam and I were talking to a farmer, and he said, over all these, he's a farmer for a long time and seen all these new crops come and go, and promises and failings, and even things like Roundup Ready crops. He said, we get all these promises and think that, finally we're going to get something that's really going to help us, and then it fails. And he made the example of Roundup Ready cotton, and that causing other problems, that weeds are more, becoming more tolerant of herbicides and can't control them anymore. But he said, but Guayule just seems like such a, such a boom to us, because finally we have this desert adapted crop that produces something that the economy needs. And if we don't have it, the economy, if other risks that we see are really come to fruition, then our economy is going to be in trouble. It's going to be a necessity to have it here in the United States, to have a domestic source. So we really, appreciate the promise that Guayule has. I have worked on a lot of other new crops. Guayule, I did my master's and dissertation on, so I've worked with it the longest. But all these other crops that seem like they'd really be perfect. One is that Sam mentioned, Lescarella. It's an oil seed that has a really specific kind of long chain fatty acid that has a lot of industrial uses for it, these hydroxy fatty acids. It's native. You see it all around Arizona. It's native here. But it doesn't have the market. Right now you can get it cheaper from castor or hydroxylating other crops. And so it doesn't, it
Have that
doesn't
immediate
work.
economic impact. So
Yeah, it would take.
it's slow to market,
Yeah,
even though you can see it being important.
Yeah.
That's got to be kind of the frustrating thing,
Yeah.
because you guys know, okay, what's good for the environment, what's good for society and all
Yeah.
that, but
yeah,
there's that gap.
yeah,
And that gap, because Guayule is a perfect example, and so is hemp. You know, that gap for Guayule that's 100 years long. Where did it naturally come from? Where's the foundation?
The center of diversity is really in northern Mexico.
Oh, it is. So
Yeah.
it's really not far. It truly is a native to North America.
Yeah,
to
it's
this region.
it's native from like in the Chihuahuan Desert
Okay.
of Mexico all the way up into the Big Bend area of Texas.
Because I
so
do-
it's not native to Arizona specifically, but
Close
we
by.
we were talking about that population near Tucson. Seed actually blew into the mountains and established itself and has survived in the wild, without anybody taking care of it for 100 years now.
Well, that's regenerative. I
It's
mean, that
nativized.
truly is
Yeah.
the concept of native, because
Yeah.
the Earth was 13.8 billion years old, and life didn't come until about 3.8 billion years ago, right? So 10 billion years there was nothing.
Yeah.
So it started from something. Most of our vegetables and our animals that we eat are from the Fertile Crescent at one point, and
Yeah.
moved around the planet, and with people and with winds. And I mean, the way our ecosystem works is pretty fascinating, and the climates are changing and soil conditions are changing. But I haven't, because you said, oh, this is native, and my landscape company, we do native projects, big native projects, both here and in Tucson, and we salvage trees and salvage plants and cactus and put them back into the landscapes to make the landscapes look like they were never touched.
Yeah.
But I don't remember seeing Guayule, and it's primarily because I'm mostly up here. But so this is really something we'd see more toward the border or the other side of the border,
Yeah.
like a Cardone versus a Saguaro, that kind of thing. So interesting enough, but it fascinates me because I transplant, and we propagate and grow stuff. So it looks like it'd be a cool plant to have.
Yeah.
Almost looks like a brittle bush
It
leaf
does.
on it,
Very
right?
similar to
Yeah,
brittle
so
bush. Yeah.
it's fascinating to me. I think, how does it grow? Do you try to grow it from cutting or from cuttings? No, but can you propagate that in a nursery setting and then take starts out, and then because it's a tough one to grow, you said,
Well,
at
Sam
first,
can
right?
talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have the seed here. So the seed is really, really tiny, very small.
Okay. Yeah.
And so before us, we work on Guayule, and all the crop in the field was put in the greenhouse. You plant it in the trays first. Then you grow in greenhouse for about 3 months.
That long.
Then you truck it to the field, and you use a transplanter. People there, plug the plant, drop it in the transplanter box, and transplant it in the field. The whole process is very, very expensive, and it's also very time consuming. And I even calculated one time, if we're going to build a commercial processing plant, we need 100,000 acres. We would use up all the hand labor in Arizona just to transplant Guayule. So it's not doable. So when we come in and we come together, we work together, we use the seed and we coat it, and we
So what is it coated
treat it
with?
with the insecticide, and we just directly plant it in the field.
And I know you guys haven't used any mycorrhiza or anything. You said you haven't played with that, but so you've got is it a natural insecticide or is it a synthetic insecticide? Doesn't matter, whatever works, right?
Yeah, it's an insecticide, and we treat it and we coat it and we plant it in the field. So this way, we don't use any hand labor, and so it's that process alone save about $1,200 per acre.
Wow. And that's
It's really
Yeah,
something makes the commercialization possible. I don't think we can do the commercialization
it's
without
almost
direct
like
seed.
planting a broadcast cereal of some sort, right? It's because that's a very small seed, but you're not broadcasting. You're using an actual seeder and putting it in rows. And spacing wise, these things get what, about 8 feet tall, maybe 7, 8, 9 feet tall at full maturity.
More like a 5 to 6 feet tall, right?
Okay,
5 feet tall.
so it's getting pretty high, and it doesn't bush out too much. Is it pretty vertical?
Well, talk about the density.
Yeah, so it's the plant itself, it's kind of grow a stem, then the tip become a flower, then start branching. So it's keep branching. That's why it doesn't grow very tall. And so when we grow it for biomass, and so we transplant. We would grow like about a 40-inch row spacing, and in row spacing about every 12-inch we have one plant.
Okay.
And so when we do direct seeding, we can plant more seed in there. We can have more plants, and the total biomass production is about the same. But remember that the rubbers in the barks, and the mid-sized barks has the highest bark to the wood ratio. And so if you have like a smaller plant, more stems, you will have a more rubber yield.
So you have a kind of a time period for harvesting, and it's, if you let it go too tall, you lose a lot of the benefits. Plus, it's a waste of time, right? So you're getting this because it branches. You have more biomass at that base, and you're able to. But what we had talked about before was the fact that this thing is kind of a cut and come again thing too. You're finding out, right? You've been able to cut it and kind of preserve it and regrow it so that you're not replanting. And how many generations of that have you been able to successfully do?
The longest crop we grow in the field is 8 years.
Wow.
We are going to do the fourth crop harvesting like this month, but I don't see any reason we can't grow another crop or another 2 crop or even more.
Yeah, well, so as far as you know, you don't know the limit yet. It could be 10, 20 years.
Nobody,
depending on how you take care of it.
That's
probably,
right,
yeah.
exactly. Nobody have gone that far. Like no research have ever gone that far.
Wow.
I think so far that we grow the crop longest like that.
So what would limit it? And obviously you've had to dig some up and look at the root patterns. This is a pretty deep root, I would think, if it's a desert plant. Is it a root plant? So it's going down there
10, 12.
again, that much. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like a hoba's
Yeah.
can go down 30 feet, right,
Yeah.
in the desert. But so it's going down that deep. It's got to be doing some amazing things for the soil.
Yeah.
It's a remediator then if it's
Yeah.
breaking through hard pan. And does it actually hit hard pan and spread out, or most native stuff that we've done in the desert, if you get into serious caliche, it'll stop, spread, and it's done. But some of these things are pretty pervasive.
Yeah.
How does this one do?
Yeah, if we have something a hard pan that would be too shallow, we have problems because
So you check out your planting area first.
Yeah, we want to have good drainage around the soil, but it brings up this point about having a plant, this perennial plant in the ground for 10 years, maybe even longer. It gets to these climate smart practices that we can employ because we can, like after it's established, we can go no-till and then let the carbon sequester in the soil for that long of a period of time. And then Sam also mentioned about, his coated seed that has an insecticide in there. Well, that's the only time that we need an insecticide. We start out, we extract the rubber, but
So this is actually rubber.
yeah, this is solid rubber
And
that
how-
we use to make the tire.
And so talk about that process a little bit. I hate to interrupt you, but we'll go back to that.
Yeah, we'll go back.
I'm
But so
curious.
once we start out, we grind up the plant
Okay.
and get it very fine, similar to this.
And no leaf or any of that. So most of the
Well,
plant.
everything's in there.
Oh, you do it all?
we don't like
not
defoliate
worth it.
anything like that. But once we cut the plant, dries up, a lot of the leaf material falls out, and then so we put it through a hammer mill before we process it, and then we add solvents to it, and we use two different kinds of solid. One solvent will take out the rubber and produce that, and then pull the resin up, and then the resin comes out within another stream.
This is the resin here?
Yeah. And so that has value. You could make a biopesticide with that.
So this thing looks to me more like the rubber, but that's the rubber.
Yeah, that's the
Because
rubber.
this looks like a deep, rich, I don't know if
It's
we can hold
it is
up
a
to the
deep,
camera.
rich mix of terpenes.
Wow.
And so some of those terpenes could be used for anti-termitic. It has anti-termitic properties that have been researched. Some of them have insecticidal properties. Some of them have adhesive properties that you could use for like in building materials.
Or tackifier. if
Yeah,
you're-
tackifiers.
Whatever you're doing with
Yeah,
soils or what.
yeah.
So
there's-
it's got a multi-use product, which makes it really one of those products we talked about, one that you look and say, wow, we should have this, right?
Yeah.
So that is the rubber. Let me see that one for a second. Because it's separating a little.
It's separating, yeah. Before,
So what is happening here?
Yeah, so the solvent's rising up, and then the rubber particles are dropping down.
This is the rubber. So
Yeah.
you're using some way of, do you use centrifugal force or some way of, or do you just let it settle in settlement tanks? How does that work?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing is really to break up the particles so you get to these rubber cells, and then we're breaking up the cells and then adding the solvent that pulls out the rubber, and then
Is the solvent reusable?
yeah, it is.
It is.
Completely.
So it's quite a sustainable practice.
Yeah.
Now, seed-wise,
Hey, let me finish up about
Yeah.
do you
Yeah,
mind?
yeah,
Because
sure.
we were talking about the climate smart practices, and so this plant, it's in the ground for 10 years. Never after it's established have we had to put any insecticide on the plant.
and it's low water using.
And it's low water use. And so, we're reducing the greenhouse gases because we're not putting a bunch of chemicals on the plant. And it's sequestering.
And with low
carbon
water
and
use,
low
you're
water
probably
use.
not getting a lot of competing weeds, or do you have a weed?
Once the
issues.
crop is established and we have cover, there aren't many weeds that compete. Sam, you want to?
Yeah, it's when it's first come out of the ground, it's pretty small, so it's not very competitive to weeds. But once after 4 or 5 months, the canopy start closing, it shade out almost all the weeds. And after 4 or 5 months there, we almost never step into the field except for experiment. We take the samples. So that's also lead to another benefit. We see a lot of birds in the field, a lot of other animals like rabbits, javelina, even coyote in the field. There are Dr. Peter Ellsworth might tell you like there are a lot of beneficial insects in there. So it's really a very good ecosystem. And because we don't harvest until every two
Right,
years,
right.
so a lot of stuff living in there.
Yeah, I guess when we compare, because it looks like a brittle bush, not quite, it's more serrated, I guess, but a brittle bush puts out a little chemical, and it drops when the leaves defoliate, and when it's super hot or super cool, it'll defoliate, and it's not DNA, but it's DNA. It's called DNA, I guess, whatever it is, and it's a natural herbicide that kind of keeps. And if you ever look at, and we've done this, we've hydroseeded, and we'll have a mix of seeds, but it outcompetes the others because there's like a ring around it that's
Yeah.
poisonous for other plants to grow. Does this have anything like that at all that you're aware of?
No, I don't know of anything.
Yeah, we done some. I done a very limited research on that when I was still with the U of A. So we tried to mix the plant chopped plant material with the soil, and we mix the resin with the soil, and in some cases we'll stun the plant. I tried with Sudan grass and also cotton. So it does has that some property, but it can be remedied by you add more nitrogen fertilizer. It seems kind of go away. So if it's chemical or it's like nitrogen effect, we don't know.
Okay.
There just so much stuff we don't know about
Gotta
this
keep going
plant.
with it, yeah.
I always say that we talk about cotton, wheat, corn, soybean, people been growing the crop for 100,000 years, and there are still hundreds of thousands of scientists doing research on it.
Sure.
With the Guayule, just
The two of you.
Yeah, we just
Maybe a few more than that. But yeah.
a few more. Yeah,
Yeah,
we just need a lot of research, and we need to
more
know
time,
the plant a
yeah,
lot
and-
better.
Yeah, because we talked about that too. Because I like to play with stuff when I get it out into the fields and stuff, and we've got several farms we work with. But I would be interested in trying to propagate this in trays. Now I know that's not cost effective from a farming standpoint, but this would be kind of a cool plant to use in the landscape, just to see how it works.
Yeah. I got it in my front yard.
And do you drip it or
It's
do
on
you?
drip, yeah.
Yeah, it did, but it uses very low water. As a matter of
Yeah.
fact, overwatering you could probably do damage because now
Exactly.
you're attracting all kinds of microorganisms maybe you don't want, and/or weed seeds that start growing and competing. So you really have to kind of fine tune that. The question I had on seed was, okay, seed's coming. When does it go to seed?
It's a long day flower, so it flowers from about now all the way to October, even November.
Oh my gosh!
So it's continuous flowering. So it doesn't like
it's
brittle
pretty.
bush flowers and then stops. Where
Right.
Guayule will just continue all summer long.
And so how do you harvest the seed? Because at some point you're going to need to create a large amount of seed because you're figuring to replace. For instance, if this were to replace the rubber plant, how many million acres do you think you'd need?
Yeah,
If you have
We
done those
start out-
calculations?
Yeah, I mean, first, I guess we'll talk about the seed harvest. And really, the only non-conventional equipment that we need for Guayule, everything else could just use existing farm equipment for planting, harvesting, all that stuff. But for seed harvest, we had to build our own seed harvester.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we have 3 of these now, and so we're doing, starting right now. We're having the harvester getting ready to be in the field and collecting seed, and we'll just keep that up.
And how does it work? Is it a shaking device? Does it come in and clip the top off the plant?
No, it's not a clipper. It really is just a shaker sucker kind of
Like a vacuum almost.
vacuum type.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you can go through there multiple times
Yeah.
because it'll reflower.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. So do you have any idea of the seed yield that you can actually get?
Yeah, it's
You got 300 acres, for instance. So are you collecting seed all the time from those 300 acres?
there's a lot of nuances to it, and sort of depends on how we manage the field. So I don't really want to say a number because there's so many
Variables.
factors that come into it that wouldn't really tell you the true number. So the seed also has to go through this cleaning process.
Oh yeah, like all seed.
To get
and
all
then
the
storage
other
in
plant parts.
cool environments and that
Yeah.
kind of thing. And
Yeah.
because it's small, though, you don't have lots of difficulty with reusing the seed, I would imagine, right? Like some seeds are really big and need to be broken down or frozen or whatever. But this seed is,
It's got a little bit of an after ripening, but we can
It does.
treat that with
and
hormone.
how long does it stay good for, you think, if you stored it properly?
Yeah, well, I was at the gene bank in Fort Collins, so we had seed there for 20 years.
Oh.
And it was still viable. So keep it in the right
And you do
conditions.
germ tests on it
Yeah,
and everything
germ
else,
tests,
and
yeah.
it's pretty high.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 300 acre, but you're growing for biomass, but at the same time, you got to be thinking we're growing for seed too, because, it does take years, and especially with the plant that takes 2 years to be viable.
Yeah.
So what, I'm trying to think for hemp, as we're growing, I think we're thinking that, God, I don't want to throw the numbers out because they'll be wrong. It's just like you, it's like on the spot. But if you're growing on 300 acres, how many acres worth of seed do you have after a season of, and you're not collecting completely because that's not your game, but what would you guess that would generate, from a standpoint, 30 times the yield, or somewhere in that range?
Probably between 20 to 30%. Like 1 acre of a seed you harvest, you can plant 20 to 30 acres.
Right. So you've been collecting seeds for that eventuality. However, you're working on your genetics.
Yeah.
So when you work on those genetics, if you create a new seed, and ideally a stabilized seed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The seed that you've banked is,
Yeah. But we're getting a lot of information about how to improve our seed collection, how quickly we can scale up and all that stuff just by using our USDA variety that's in production right now. So once we do get a new variety, the hope is that we'll be able to scale up to enough seed that we need for the first processing facility will need about 25,000 acres of plant.
yeah.
So
similar
and
to a
half of
hemp
it would
type
be
field, but
half of it would be harvested in year one of the opening, the other half
Try to
next
stagger it.
year. So it would be this rotation
Right.
between. So that would be a quarter scale facility, and then eventually the other 4 lines of the facility would open, and we would need 100,000 acres. So working with this
which
now,
shouldn't be hard because you've got 25,000 acres. Technically,
Oh,
the
yeah.
amount of seed you're pulling off it would be 30 times that, and you're only trying to quadruple it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's an easy progression.
Yeah, that part when
Right.
get there. But when we're starting out with a half an acre
It takes
of
a while.
plants,
Yeah.
there's that issue that we need.
So if somebody wants to buy this seed, it's not really for sale at this point in time,
No,
right? So I have to get gifted.
yeah,
So I'd like to try to put some in our greenhouse for our nonprofit, urban farming, because we have kids from schools that come,
Yeah.
and you're basically then, like any other seed, you're taking it into a greenhouse over the winter, maybe for a few months. Or does it matter?
No.
Doesn't matter when you put it in trays or anything.
we do. I mean, it depends on your facility. Like if you have good greenhouses, you can do it in the
Anytime of the-
summertime or whatever.
Sure.
But we normally do we want to transplant around this time of year. So that means we're planting in the greenhouse about 3.5 months before that.
Okay. So yeah, I'd love to toy with growing some of this for landscape.
Yeah.
But and then ideally with some of the farmers we're working with is to even in small, because I got a bunch of different things I want to try with it, like everybody.
Yeah.
From a university standpoint, especially from seed guys, you're looking at lab and
Yeah.
a lot of that. But I'd love to look at doing cover crops around it, or just playing in a row doing this or that, and definitely I'd
Yeah.
try to use that endomycorrhiza to see
Yeah.
if that's a factor. And
Yeah.
just, you know,
We want to encourage
how
that
does it
kind of
work
thing.
in rotation with
Yeah.
other plants too, you know? Because it is kind of a cool thing. So, well, I'm gonna have to. I could talk about this for hours and hours to me,
Us
but
too.
I'll try to wrap up
Okay.
now. And I thank my guests today, Sam Wang, David Dierig, and you're both kind of working. So it's a project. You're really U of A extension people.
No.
Kind
No,
of, or you're really Bridgestone people.
We're
Both
really
Bridgestone.
Bridgestone.
Yeah.
So you're Bridgestone people
Yeah.
now, but you just have a background in academics.
Yes.
And so that's that. And then, hats off to the Bridgestone people for being thought leaders in this, because, it's again, that we can go on and on about the politics, but you would think from a national security standpoint
Yeah.
that, and or from an industry standpoint, other people would be, working with Bridgestone, because it seems to me like, it's one it's one event away from creating crisis, right? So,
Yeah.
but hopefully you guys, what would you guess? How many years out would you, because with today's technology, where you would get it a little more viable, a little more material out of it?
Yeah, I could see this happening like early 2030.
That's fast.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
compared to old technologies, that's
and you never know, like if there's another big spike in rubber prices, it could happen very fast.
that moves it faster.
Yeah.
Yeah. Crisis is really
Yeah.
the mother
Yeah.
of invention, right?
Yeah.
So, well, I thank both my guests today. I'd love to have you guys come back as we progress, and we do podcasts remote too. So maybe
Yeah.
we'll go down and look at what you're doing while you're doing whatever you. I know
Yeah, that's a
some-
great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thanks again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank
Thanks,
you.
Mike.
Thank you for joining the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Click subscribe and like for ongoing insightful conversations. Explore our webpage for show notes and additional resources. Visit our guests' webpage for deeper insights. Your engagement is the foundation of our journey, and until next time, keep pursuing wisdom.